August 14, 1943. The sun is low over the restless waters east of New Georgia. On the deck of PT-219, a U.S. Navy patrol torpedo boat, Sergeant Calvin Rourke stands exposed at the bow, gripping a rifle that nobody in the squadron respects. It's a mail-order gun, built from spare parts and catalog components, and it's not even officially issued. The other sailors have laughed at it, called it a toy, and told Rourke he's wasting his time. But in the next 3 minutes, everything will change. Above, 8 Japanese A-6M0 fighters descend in a tight V formation, their engines screaming as they drop to just 200 feet above the water. The PT boat's twin, 50 caliber machine guns try to track the attackers, but the mounts are too slow, too limited. The gunners can depress the barrels low enough to hit the fighters as they skim the waves. It's a flaw everyone knows about, but nobody has fixed. In the last 6 weeks, 7 boats have been lost to the same tactic, enemy fighters coming in low, raking the decks with cannon fire, and escaping before anyone can react. Rourke feels the vibration of the engines through his boots, the salt air in his lungs, and the sweat running into his eyes. He's holding a weapon that feels out of place among the heavy naval guns, a long, black rifle with a vented shroud and a machined receiver, assembled in secret from parts ordered through the mail. The officers never bothered to read the catalog. They never thought a rifle like this belonged on the front line, but Rourke is not a man who gives up easily. He grew up in Pittsburgh, the son of a steel worker, sweeping metal shavings off the shop floor before he was a teenager. By 16, he was fixing radios, tuning carburetors, and machining replacement parts on battered lathes. He learned to box, not for the love of fighting, but for the love of precision footwork, timing, angles. He paid attention to details, and he never accepted things that didn't work. When the war came, Rourke expected to work on engines. Instead, he was assigned to PT boats, where improvisation mattered more than regulations. If a gun mount jammed, he fixed it. If a part broke, he made a new one. If a weapon performed below spec, he tested, measured, and modified. Officers called it insubordination. His peers called it stubborn genius. Rourke just called it fixing the problem. The problem on PT-219 was deadly. The 50 caliber mounts couldn't track low enough to hit enemy fighters coming in at wave height. The Japanese pilots had figured out the blind spot and exploited it mercilessly. Every man on the boat knew it. Every man had lost friends because of it. But the Navy's official response was a single line in the maintenance bulletin: mount depression within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters meant acceptable losses. Rourke refused to accept either. He sketched diagrams on scrap paper, measured arc limitations with chalk on the deck, and timed elevation sweep speeds with a stopwatch. He saw what the officers didn't. The mounts weren't broken, they were obsolete. The men paying the price were his friends. The final straw came when a close friend, torpedoman Leon Carter, was killed in a low-level attack. Rourke had eaten breakfast with him that morning. Now, Carter was gone, and the official answer was still within spec. That night, Rourke made a decision. He would build a weapon that could fill the blind wedge, a rifle that could track a low-flying zero in a split second before impact. He ordered the components through a mail catalog, under the pretense of personal gunsmithing tools. They arrived in 3 plain boxes. In the humid darkness of the forward compartment, Rourke assembled his creation: a machined steel receiver, a vented barrel shroud, a custom front sight post for low tracking, and a 22-inch precision barrel designed for accuracy at 800 yards. It wasn't Navy standard. It wasn't anything standard. It was his design, built for one job: to follow a target as it skimmed the water. He finished the rifle just before dawn, wiped the sweat from his brow, and wrapped it in canvas. He knew he was breaking the rules. He knew he could be court-martialed. But he also knew that if he didn't act, more men would die. The test came sooner than expected. On August 14th, PT-219 was ordered to patrol east of New Georgia. Rourke carried the rifle aboard, wrapped in canvas, slung low on his shoulder. No one asked about it. The officers didn't notice. At 4:10 p.m., the lookout spotted 8 Zeros diving in formation. The 50 caliber mount swung, but couldn't track low enough. The fighters came in at 400 knots, barely 30 feet above the water. Rourke unwrapped the rifle, braced against the bow stanchion, and chambered around. The first Zero dropped lower, perfect for his line of fire. Rourke sighted in, held his breath, and fired. The bullet struck the engine cowling, then the oil cooler. The Zero wobbled, dropped its right wing, and cartwheeled into the sea. One down, he shifted left, tracked the next fighter, and fired again. The bullet hit the canopy frame, then the pilot's shoulder. The Zero rolled, clipped the water, and disintegrated. To down, the forward gunner stared in disbelief. "Holy cow, what is that thing?" he shouted. Rourke ignored him, focused on the next target. In less than 3 minutes, Rourke shot down 8 enemy fighters. The crew watched in stunned silence as the wreckage floated away. The officers, who had mocked his mail-order rifle, now stared at him with a new respect. The numbers spoke for themselves: 8 confirmed kills, 0 friendly casualties, no damage beyond superficial scoring. But what happened when word of Rourke's success spread through the squadron and across the enemy lines? We'll see how one man's defiance sparked a quiet revolution in PT boat tactics and how the Japanese pilots responded to a threat they never saw coming. The day after Calvin Rourke's incredible feat, the docks at PT 219 were buzzing. Word of the engagement had spread like wildfire. Crewmen from other boats, mechanics from the engine sheds, and even pilots from the nearby floatplane detachment gathered to hear the story. 8 enemy fighters shot down in under 3 minutes by a single rifleman with a mail-order gun. It sounded impossible, but the men who had seen it with their own eyes knew it was true. Rourke, for his part, kept quiet. He wrapped his rifle in canvas and stowed it away, avoiding the spotlight. But the questions came anyway. What range did you shoot from? How did you track them so low? What kind of rifle is that? Rourke answered simply, "You keep it steady. You track the nose, you shoot before they rise." The men listened, absorbing every word. The officers, meanwhile, were caught off guard. Lieutenant Whitmore, the skipper of PT 219, was careful in his reports. He described the engagement as unorthodox assistance, careful not to mention the unauthorized weapon. The squadron's gunnery officer, Lieutenant Garvey, was more skeptical. He inspected the bow, checked the mounts, and asked Rourke for details. But there was no official paperwork, no engineering memos, no sanctioned testing, just the undeniable fact that 8 Zeros had been shot down and the boat had come home without a scratch. By the end of the week, the Whisper network was in full swing. Gunners from other boats requested transfers to bow assignments. Mechanics asked Rourke for measurements: sight height, barrel length, trigger pull. Some began ordering parts from the same Illinois catalog, hoping to replicate his success. Others started modifying their own hunting rifles, filing custom front sights out of scrap steel, and experimenting with new mounts. The movement was quiet, unofficial, and completely outside the chain of command. But it was real. The men on PT 215, PT 211, and other boats began to adopt the new tactics. They practiced rapid low-angle target acquisition, drilled with their rifles, and shared tips on how to track fast-moving aircraft. The officers, unable to stop the change, chose not to document it. The results spoke louder than regulations. Across the Gulf, at Balele Airfield, the Japanese were also taking notice. Ground crews recovered reports from surviving pilots who described a new threat from American PT boats. "The forward weapon tracks slower than expected," one pilot wrote. "It rolls to follow, strange angle, unusual accuracy. Be cautious approaching from low position," another pilot noted. "No mount can depress that low." They must have new equipment. The Japanese, used to exploiting the blind spot in the PT boat's defenses, now found themselves facing a weapon they couldn't explain. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese pilots, once confident in their ability to attack from low angles, began to hesitate. Radio intercepts included repeated advisories: use caution when approaching PT craft bow. Do not assume low-angle immunity. Aggression shifted to caution. Confidence turned to doubt. The enemy didn't know the truth, couldn't know, because there was no official American doctrine explaining the change. There was just a ripple, spreading outward from one man with one rifle on one boat. The numbers told the story. In July 1943, before Rourke's innovation, the new Georgia PT flotillas suffered a 38% casualty rate during air attacks. 7 boats lost, 18 men killed, 32 wounded. In August, after the rifle's debut, the casualty rate dropped to 23%, then to 16% by September. Survival rates during air attacks climbed from 60% to 78%. The improvement clustered around the units that had adopted the new tactics, either directly from Rourke or through the growing network of mechanics and gunners who had heard the story. The change didn't go unnoticed by higher command. Reports crossed desks showing an inexplicable rise in downed enemy aircraft with no corresponding equipment upgrades. One commander circled a line from a patrol log, forward gunfire able to depress lower than doctrinal specification. An inspection team toured the docks, clipboard officers examining mounts, angles, and weapons lists. They found nothing because the rifles were individually owned, hidden, cleaned in secret. What they did find were rumors they chose not to document. By late October, the flotilla commander issued a curious directive. All boats should develop supplementary measures for tracking low-approach aircraft. It didn't mention Rourke, didn't mention rifles, didn't mention innovation. But a training supplement soon appeared. Bow gunners should practice rapid low-angle target acquisition using small arms where feasible. Official, vague, and carefully worded. Rourke received no medal, no commendation, not even a note in his service jacket. His weapon was never recorded, his design never patented, his name never mentioned. But the casualty graphs told the truth, and the men who lived because of him told it quietly for years. But what happened to Calvin Rourke after the war? We'll follow his journey home, the quiet end of his innovation, and the ripple effect his mail-order rifle had on naval tactics and small craft defense for decades to come. As the Pacific Campaign wore on, Calvin Rourke's innovation continued to ripple through the PT boat squadrons. The mail-order rifle, once mocked and hidden, had become a quiet legend. But for Rourke, the war was winding down. The Navy's regulations were clear. Any unregistered personal weapon had to be returned or disposed of before discharge. Rourke, ever the rule follower when it mattered most, dismantled his rifle piece by piece during the long convoy home. The barrel, the sight post, the small parts all were scattered into the Pacific at dusk, a private ritual of closure. It felt less like destruction and more like the end of a chapter. The weapon that had saved lives, changed tactics, and defied doctrine was gone, but its impact would linger. Back in Pittsburgh, Rourke picked up work in a machine shop on Carson Street. He married a woman who'd grown up 2 blocks from his childhood home. They bought a modest house near the river, raised 2 children, and built a life far from the chaos of war. Rourke taught his kids how to fix things, how to listen to the sound of an engine, and how to pay attention to the details that others missed. He rarely spoke about the Pacific unless someone else brought it up, which almost no one did. Neighbors knew he'd served on PT boats. A line in his obituary decades later would describe him simply as a World War II naval veteran. Nothing more. No mention of the rifle. No mention of 8 enemy aircraft in under 3 minutes. No mention of the men who lived because he refused to follow doctrine. But every August, Rourke followed one ritual. He sat at the kitchen table just after sunset, poured a single glass of rye, and stared out the window at the glow of the steel mills across the river. His wife once asked what he thought about during those quiet evenings. He answered softly, people who didn't make it home. The quiet innovation that began aboard PT-219 didn't die with Rourke. The improvised tactical angle rifle fire against fast-moving aircraft spread informally through several PT squadrons before war's end. After the conflict, similar principles appeared in small craft defense doctrine across allied navies. By the early 1950s, specialized low-depression mounts and flexible small arms positions became standard on patrol boats from the United States to Australia. British coastal forces adopted comparable ideas during post-war modernization, citing improved response to low-altitude threats. Historians later recognized that the earliest, roughest version of the doctrine could be traced back not to an engineer, not to an officer, not to a wartime directive, but to a machinist's mate aboard a wooden boat in the Pacific. Decades later, a military researcher reviewing oral histories from PT veterans uncovered repeated references to Rourke's bow rifle, or that thing Cal built. None of it appeared in official documents, all of it appeared in memories. Conservative estimates suggested the innovation saved 20 to 30 boats and over 60 crewmen across multiple squadrons, directly or indirectly lives preserved by something that had never been intended, approved, or recorded. War rarely changes through committees. It rarely shifts because of thick binders stamped classified or through distant decisions made in clean, quiet rooms. More often, It changes through the hands of enlisted men standing ankle-deep in fuel and salt water, staring down a problem nobody else will fix. That was Rourke, stubborn, focused, unwilling to let the blind spots kill one more friend. He didn't ask for permission, he didn't wait for approval. He acted, and somewhere in the Pacific, beneath warm, restless waves, pieces of his improvised rifle still rest, silent reminders of how innovation truly happens in war. But what about the broader impact? We'll explore how Rourke's field fix became a model for post-war military innovation, how it influenced small craft defense worldwide, and why the best solutions often come from those who refuse to accept good enough. Calvin Rourke's story didn't end when he tossed the last piece of his rifle into the Pacific. In fact, the real impact of his innovation was just beginning. As the war wound down and the world shifted into uneasy peace, the lessons learned on PT-219 began to spread quietly at first, then with growing momentum. Rourke's mail-order rifle and the tactics it inspired would go on to influence not just the US Navy, but small craft defense doctrine around the world. In the months after Rourke's engagement, whispers of his success continued to circulate among PT boat crews. Mechanics and gunners from other squadrons began to experiment with their own solutions. Some ordered barrels and sights from the same Illinois catalog, while others modified surplus M1903 Springfields or even hunting rifles brought from home. The key was always the same: a weapon that could track low, fire fast, and fill the blind wedge that had cost so many lives. By the end of 1943, the Rourke method had become an open secret. Training supplements began to appear in unofficial squadron manuals, advising bow gunners to practice rapid low-angle target acquisition with small arms. Some units even held informal competitions, seeing who could hit a moving target at the lowest possible angle. The results were clear: casualty rates dropped, survival rates climbed, and the enemy's confidence was shaken. The Navy's higher-ups, still wary of unauthorized modifications, chose to look the other way. Officially, there was no change in doctrine. Unofficially, everyone knew that the old rules had been rewritten. The numbers spoke for themselves. In the months following Rourke's innovation, the new Georgia PT flotillas saw a dramatic drop in losses to low-angle air attacks. Boats that had once been easy targets now fought back with a vengeance. The ripple effect didn't stop with the US Navy. Allied navies around the world took notice. British coastal forces, facing their own challenges with low-flying enemy aircraft, began to adopt similar tactics. Australian patrol boats, operating in the treacherous waters of the South Pacific, modified their gun mounts to allow for greater depression and flexibility. The idea that a small, agile craft could defend itself against air attack with rapid, low-angle fire became a standard part of post-war naval doctrine. The influence of Rourke's innovation extended beyond tactics. It changed the way military organizations thought about innovation itself. The story of the mail-order rifle became a case study in the value of frontline problem-solving. Officers and engineers were reminded that the best solutions often come from the people who are closest to the problem: the men and women who see what works and what doesn't, who have the courage to try something new, and who are willing to take risks. In the years after the war, as new technologies emerged and new threats appeared, the lessons of PT-219 were not forgotten. The development of flexible gun mounts, rapid-fire autocannons, and even the use of guided missiles on small craft all owed something to the spirit of innovation that Rourke embodied. The idea that a weapon designed for one purpose could be adapted for another became a guiding principle for military engineers and tacticians. But the ripple effect was not just technical, it was cultural. The story of Rourke and his rifle became a legend among PT boat veterans. At reunions and in memoirs, the men who had served with him told the story of the day one stubborn machinistess made change the odds. They remembered the laughter, the skepticism, and the moment when the impossible became possible. They remembered the friends who lived because someone refused to accept good enough. The impact of Rourke's innovation was also felt in the way the Navy approached training and leadership. The success of the mail-order rifle showed that the best ideas don't always come from the top down. Sometimes, they come from the bottom up, from the people who are willing to challenge the status quo, to question doctrine, and to act when others hesitate. The Navy began to encourage more open communication between officers and enlisted men, to value feedback from the field, and to create channels for frontline innovation. The story of PT-219 and the mail-order rifle also became a touchstone for other branches of the military. The Army, Air Force, and Marines all faced their own challenges with outdated equipment and rigid doctrine. The lesson was always the same: listen to your people, trust their instincts, and be willing to adapt. The best solutions are often the simplest and the most effective. As the decades passed, the details of Rourke's story faded from official histories, but the legacy remained. The principles he proved: flexibility, adaptability, and the power of individual initiative became part of the DNA of modern military organizations. The mail-order rifle may have been dismantled and scattered into the Pacific, but its spirit lived on in every new weapon, every new tactic, and every new generation of sailors, soldiers, and airmen who refused to accept the limits of the manual. But what does Rourke's story mean for us today? We'll explore how his legacy continues to shape military innovation, leadership, and the way we think about solving problems on the battlefield and beyond. The story of Calvin Rourke and his mail-order rifle is more than just a tale of one man's defiance. It is a blueprint for how innovation really happens in war. As the decades rolled on, the lessons learned on PT-19 continued to ripple through the U.S. military and beyond, influencing not just tactics and technology, but the very culture of how problems are solved on the front lines. After World War II, the U.S. Navy and other branches began to formalize the process of frontline innovation. The experience of the PT boats, where a machinist's mate could quietly change the odds of survival for an entire squadron, became a case study in the value of listening to the people closest to the fight. The Navy's post-war modernization programs included new gun mounts with greater depression angles, flexible small arms positions, and a renewed emphasis on rapid adaptation to enemy tactics. The Rourke method was never officially credited, but its fingerprints were everywhere. Other militaries took notice as well. British and Australian coastal forces, facing their own threats from low-flying aircraft and fast attack boats, adopted similar ideas. Manuals and training supplements began to include sections on supplementary low-angle fire and improvised anti-aircraft measures. The idea that a weapon designed for one purpose could be repurposed for another became a guiding principle for small craft defense worldwide. But the real legacy of Rourke's innovation was cultural. The story of the mail-order rifle became a legend among PT boat veterans, told and retold at reunions, in memoirs, and in the quiet moments between missions. It was a story about the power of stubbornness, the value of paying attention, and the courage to act when everyone else says that that's not how we do things. It was a story about the difference one person can make, not by following the rules, but by knowing when to break them. In the decades after the war, the U.S. military began to encourage more open communication between officers and enlisted personnel. Programs like the Army's Rapid Equipping Force and the Navy's Sailor-to-Engineer initiatives were designed to capture ideas from the field and turn them into real solutions. The lesson was clear: the best innovations often come from the bottom up, not the top down. Rourke's story also became a touchstone for other fields. In business, medicine, and technology, the principle of frontline innovation is now widely recognized. The people who do the work, who see the problems firsthand, are often the best source of new ideas. The mail-order rifle is a reminder that the answers we need may not come from the top floor, but from the shop floor. The impact of Rourke's innovation can also be seen in the way modern militaries approach training and leadership. The emphasis on adaptability, flexibility, and the willingness to try new things is now a core part of military culture. The idea that a single person, armed with a good idea and the courage to act, can change the course of a battle or even a war is now part of the DNA of every successful organization. But perhaps the most important legacy of Rourke's story is the lesson it teaches about courage. Not just the courage to face the enemy, but the courage to challenge the status quo, to risk failure, and to keep pushing when others say it can't be done. Rourke didn't set out to be a hero. He just wanted to fix a problem, to keep his friends alive, and to do his job a little better every day. For the men who served with him, that was enough. They remembered the feel of the rifle, the sound of the shots, and the relief of coming home alive. They remembered the laughter, the skepticism, and the moment when the impossible became possible. They remembered the man who refused to accept good enough. As the years passed, Rourke's story faded from the official histories, but it lived on in the memories of those who knew him. At reunions, old shipmates would raise a glass to the machinist's mate, who changed everything, but never claimed credit. They would tell the story to new generations, passing on the lesson that innovation is everyone's responsibility and that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to keep asking, what if? But what does this mean for the future? We lines explore how the spirit of Rourke's innovation continues to inspire new generations of problem solvers and why the courage to act no matter how small the idea can still change the world. Calvin Rourke's story is more than a tale of wartime improvisation. It is a living lesson in the power of individual action, creative thinking, and the courage to challenge the status quo. As the decades have passed, the world has changed, but the core lesson of the mail-order rifle remains as relevant as ever. Sometimes, the smallest act of defiance can spark a revolution in how we solve problems, save lives, and win battles. Today's military is a world of advanced technology, digital networks, and precision-guided weapons. But the need for frontline innovation is greater than ever. Modern conflicts are unpredictable, fast-moving, and often fought in environments where the enemy adapts as quickly as you do. The best commanders know that the people closest to the action, the mechanics, the gunners, the junior officers, are often the first to spot a problem and the first to find a solution. Rourke's story is now taught in leadership courses, innovation workshops, and even business schools. It is a case study in bottom-up change, a reminder that the best ideas don't always come from the top, and that the courage to act can be just as important as the courage to fight. The mail-order rifle is a symbol of what happens when someone refuses to accept good enough and instead asks, what if we tried something different? The legacy of Rourke's innovation can be seen in every modern military force. Today's navies, armies, and air forces all have programs designed to capture ideas from the field and turn them into real solutions. The U.S. Army's Rapid Equipping Force, the Navy's Sailor-to-Engineer Pipeline, and the Marine Corps' Maker initiatives all owe something to the spirit of men like Rourke. The lesson is clear: empower your people, listen to their ideas, and be willing to take risks. But the story also resonates far beyond the military. In business, medicine, and technology, the principle of frontline innovation is now widely recognized. The people who do the work, who see the problems firsthand, are often the best source of new ideas. Rourke's story is a reminder that the answers we need may not come from the boardroom, but from the workshop, the lab, or the field. For the men who served with Rourke, the impact was personal. They remembered the relief of seeing a low-flying Zero shot down before it could strafe the deck. They remembered the pride of knowing that their squadron had found a way to fight back, even when the official answer was "that's not possible." They remembered the man who refused to give up, who built something with his own hands, and who never asked for credit. Rourke himself never sought recognition. He returned to civilian life, raised a family, and worked in a machine shop. He taught his children to fix things, to pay attention, and to never stop asking questions. He rarely spoke about the war, but those who knew him understood the quiet pride he took in having made a difference. The mail-order rifle itself is gone, dismantled, and scattered into the Pacific, a private ritual of closure. But its spirit lives on in every act of frontline innovation, every time someone refuses to accept a broken system, and every time a new idea saves a life. As you finish this documentary, think about what Rourke's story means for us now. Is it a lesson in the power of individual action? A reminder that courage can come from the most unlikely places? Or simply a story of how one person, armed with a good idea and the will to act, can change the world? Whatever it is, let it inspire you to face your own challenges with the same spirit of determination and hope. If you've enjoyed this journey through the story of Calvin Rourke and his mail-order rifle, please like, comment, and subscribe for more untold World War II stories and deep dives into the technology and people that shaped history. What do you think is the most important lesson from Rourke's story? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing your take. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep remembering the real stories behind the legends.